Greetings everybody out in Facebook land. We are here in Port Arthur, Texas with the Kansas City Southern 503. It's been in the park since 1957 and recently it was decided to dispose of the locomotive. It was abated just this past week. You can see all the boiler jacketings off of it. There are several organizations that are interested in saving this machine, but unfortunately, like everybody, they're strapped for cash. We're trying to raise $50,000 to help offset the cost of acquiring the locomotive from the scrapper who owns it and to move it. Now, the clock is ticking. This locomotive was to be already scrapped this week. Thankfully, heavy rains prevented them from beginning the process. As it is, the locomotive's demolition, as they're calling it, will begin next week if there's not a definitive plan for it by Wednesday or so. Overall, the locomotive is in rather good condition. We've been taking spot readings on the boiler. The crown brasses are all new, the axles are new, the crank pins are new. If it had been sitting under a shed all this time, it would be in great shape. I should mention that on my page there is a link to a GoFundMe account that has been set up for this locomotive. Every little donation helps. There has been an absolute outcry in the preservation community about the fact that we are about to lose a locomotive in the year 2018, that scrappings like this should not happen. And I agree. That's the reason I took time to come down here, meet with the people who own the locomotive, do an inspection, and try to develop some course of action for getting it out of here. Now, I am gaining nothing by doing this other than playing a part in historic preservation. Again, there's a GoFundMe page set up for this locomotive. Every bit helps. Clock is ticking. The machine's in surprisingly good condition. The boiler's actually relatively sound. It needs a patch on the back head. The barrel courses are in good condition. The firebox interior is all but new. And it would be a travesty for this thing to get cut up. Now, unfortunately, time is of the essence, as I've already stated, but for those who are just joining us, this engine has about 5 days before they begin cutting it up. Thankfully, in the course of doing the asbestos abatement, they didn't do any damage to the artifact. In fact, actually, everything was done quite well. If I were to have asbestos abated off of a locomotive I intended to rebuild, I could not have asked for somebody to have been more gentle with it. But again, there's been an absolute outcry in the preservation world about this locomotive getting cut up. Many people calling for somebody to do something. Well, here we are. There are several options as to where it can go. I highly encourage anybody who actually wants to see this locomotive saved to donate to the GoFundMe page listed on my site directly below this live stream.
In the comments.
Okay, so Nick posted it again in the comments, and you can find it there also. And, you know, if the campaign is unsuccessful, as I understand the way GoFundMe works, at the point where one withdraws from a campaign, the money is returned to the donors. So that's how that would go. But, you know, this locomotive, it's entirely too unique to let it go to scrap. First off, you know, I mean, yeah, it was built in the teens. It survived all this time. It was been heavily modernized through its life. It has an Alco continuous blowdown. It has weld fabricated spring rigging, which you just don't see. The locomotive received a lot of rebuild work very late in its career. As you can see, it actually springs are from '49. If it can pick it up, the crank pins were installed in 1945. New driving axles in 1941. And so yeah, it'd be a travesty to see this locomotive go to waste. But that is the future of the machine unless money is raised to extricate her from this park. So I'm about to end this video, but I ask everybody who has an interest in seeing this locomotive saved to please donate money to the GoFundMe site and to share this and the GoFundMe link so that hopefully it doesn't get cut up. Here, Nick, take the camera for a moment. All right. I'm gonna go up into the firebox.
Okay. Yeah, folks, just to reinforce, time is absolutely of the essence with this project. So if you were able to at all, please help us out. Let's see if we can find this thing a better home.
So the back head is the worst off of any part of the boiler. Actually, the rest of the boiler is pretty well pristine. It's just the back head that needs some heavy work. It needs to be replaced, quite honestly, if it were to operate. The interior of the firebox is largely new. You can see some of the ultrasound numbers. The one up on the crown is 377, 382 thousandths. For those unfamiliar what ultrasound numbers are, there's such a thing as an ultrasonic thickness meter. It's kind of like a micrometer, but you don't have to access both sides of the metal, and you can measure the thickness of your boiler sheets or anything you want to, as long as it's made out of metal. Anywho, virtually all of this firebox is at new spec, except for right up along the top of the flue sheet there. It needs to be replaced. But beyond that, nothing else is measured out to be thin. Obviously, my mind is always towards an operational future, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case with this machine as long as it gets preserved. There's a city in Louisiana that's interested in acquiring it for the sake of preserving it. They've long wanted a steam locomotive to display. I've heard something about another city in North Carolina that would be willing to take on preserving the locomotive. And then of course there's a couple tourist railroads that are interested. Me personally, I would like to see it go to an operational entity, but as long as it gets preserved, I don't care where it goes. So again, everyone, oh, what's the purchase price? Asks Scott Stotler. Well, that's not been determined 100%, but it will not exceed the scrap value, which is nominally $17,700. So hopefully the scrapper, the environmental company, which I have to actually go and look and see what it is. I don't remember the name. Inland Environmental. They have been absolutely brilliant through this. They are extraordinarily accommodating in terms of letting us come in and look at their asset. It is no longer owned by the city. It is owned by the company that is going to scrap it, if it's not gotten out of here. And the fellow who owns the company is kind of an old ironhead. He's into old cars and totally would like to see this thing preserved. So anything anybody can do would be greatly appreciated in terms of preserving an artifact. It is one of only 2 locomotives of its type left. Interesting story behind it. The city of Port Arthur wanted a steam locomotive to exhibit and asked the Kansas City Southern for one. Well, Kansas City Southern had already scrapped all of their locomotives, but they called on one of their subsidiary railroads and put a locomotive together. Terry, the insulation's gone, and this thing is not terribly small. It's actually let's see, the locomotive itself weighs 194,000 pounds. I forget what the weight on drivers is, but yeah, it's a pretty good sized engine. It actually develops 40,000 pounds of tractive effort, 40,300 to be specific. So anywho, they called upon one of their subsidiary short lines and pieced this locomotive together for the sake of trying to create a Kansas City Southern engine to go into the park for the city of Port Arthur. I'm trying to get that spider out of my way. Make sure the floor is stout. It's not on the other side. But everything, you know, important remains on the locomotive. Superheater units are in it. Firebox is in good shape. Injectors are all here. Pipes were cut as a action towards getting the asbestos off, but you know, that's not the end of the world. So again, anything anybody can do. If you want to see this locomotive preserved, GoFundMe page is in any number of Facebook groups, and directly below this live stream video on my That Steam Guy page. So everyone, please donate, share, encourage others to do so. $50,000 might sound like a lot of money, and it's definitely a lot of money to me, don't get me wrong. But spread out amongst all of us who desire to not see a mainline steam locomotive scrapped in the year 2018, dig deep. You know, while maybe not as significant to some, this is no different than the atrocity of Dick Jensen's Pacific getting scrapped in Chicago back in the 90s. So I think with that, wait, has any contact been made with the Maxwell Crosby asks, has any contact been made with the scrapper, and have they been open to other options besides the worst case scenario? See, here's the complication for them. Mosquitoes are out here like you would not believe, by the way. Here's the problem for them. They are subject to the terms of their contract. I'm going to hand this back to Nick so I can get down. All right. They are subject to the terms of their contract with the city of Port Arthur. They have a, call it a drop dead date. There's some freeze damage to the power reverse gear. That's unfortunate. They have a drop dead date associated with getting this locomotive out of here. Cordless grinder, UT meter. And don't have a lot of wiggle room. Now the city might be able to give them some wiggle room. That's an unknown at this point. But as it is, as I've already stated, they were to have already scrapped this locomotive before anybody in the preservation world knew that it was even at risk. Now, there's a question from Hayden Sable. Once the money is raised, what's the plan of action? What does the money guarantee? Removal and that's it? Well, removal and preservation. The exact future of the locomotive right now is not known as to whether it will be a display piece or undergo an operational restoration. What is certain is that if it doesn't leave, it'll be scrapped. Period. It would have already been scrapped now had weather not prevented them from beginning the process. I mean, literally, folks, here they have this track hoe here and a wrecking ball to knock the pieces of this locomotive apart as they cut it up. And this process would already have begun and been over with if it wasn't for the weather preventing them from doing so. So this is very real. This is very now. Unfortunately, I don't like it any more than anyone else, but an exact plan of action is not something that...
There's no time.
There's no time to put together definitive answers. There are days before this locomotive goes under the torch. That's just all there is to it. So, again, and hey, Richard Jenkins just donated. Thank you, Richard Jenkins. That's greatly appreciated. We've already had a number of donations come in, generally around the $50 mark. Dustin Scott asked, just wondering if the train is drivable or movable. Well, movable, yes. It can't roll at this point. It's been sitting in salty air for too long. But the plan for removing this locomotive from the park would be to do the same thing that I did on the Sioux 2425, as well as the plan that I laid out for the lost engines of Roanoke. For those who are not familiar, those are a couple Norfolk and Western 480s that I was lucky enough to get to help in an absolute minuscule way with the movement of. But basically we'd come in and we'd cut through the smoke box, around the cylinder saddle, through the waste sheets. This is part of the locomotive. Take it loose, front and back of the firebox from the frame. Lift the boiler off the frame. So the boiler on one truck, the chassis on another, and the tender on a third. So that's how it would come out of here. So no, it's not drivable, it's not runnable, it's not movable, but it can be removed without a great deal of effort. It only takes money. Let's see, what is the time frame of years that this engine would have been in operation? Well, I'll tell you what, here, there's a plaque. There's a plaque over here talking about the entire history of the locomotive. Surprisingly, it survived in terms of it not having been stolen. Engine 503, born 1913, died out of service, 1957. So there you go. There's the plaque. It was donated by Kansas City Southern in the end of 1957. And it was a project sponsored by the Lions Club. So, way back in the day. So anyway, am I planning on attempting it? I don't know what you mean. The boiler, James Byberg. The boiler is not in bad shape. The only part of it that shows any need of repair is the back head. It's directly below the cab roof hatch. And the cab roof hatch is completely rotted out. And so every time it rained, it soaked the insulation. But at the end of the day, replacing the back head is not that big of a deal. It might seem it. We did it on the 4501. Used to be done, not regularly perhaps, but it was not an obscure thing to have accomplished in the course of a locomotive's career. And Nick, well, Nick's just ready to get going. Attempting to restore it. Okay, well, that depends, Zach, as to whether or not it is acquired by a tourist railroad or whether it goes for preservation only. John Hillier, the locomotive will either end up in North Carolina, Louisiana, or one of a couple tourist railroads who at this point don't really want to have the information out there. You know how that is, but believe me, once a determination is made, the the entity taking on either the restoration or just the preservation, which God knows would require some restoration even for static exhibit, will make it very, very well known, I'm sure. How much would it take to get it in running condition? Well, I'll go out on a limb and say that given everything I've seen, it's less than $1 million engine. And that's saying a lot for steam locomotives today, especially one that's been sitting out in the environment. I mean, the exterior of the boiler, except for the back head, is in exceptional condition. You can see some more UT numbers here. Even right at the muttering, it's only wasted 40 thousandths. Ken, if you're funding it, man, whatever whistle you want, my friend. Back here is 571. Right up here on the throat sheet, 703. We spot checked some more areas inside the frame, but not going in there again. That was a brutal and unpleasant experience. It's the type of engine you really need a pit for. So yeah, anybody else have any other questions? Maxwell, thank you. Hey, Maxwell says just donated not much, but I can't see us lose another one. Exactly the point. It doesn't have to be a lot. My page has over 7,000 followers, and all that is needed is not much more than, my gosh, $6 from each one, just to put it in perspective. Now, that's not to say I expect that 7,000 people are going to all donate $6, but at the end of the day, the locomotive can be saved. And it really, when you think about it, crowdfunding and all that, how much to get it out of the park? Ted Merrill, how much to get it out of the park? Well, the exact cost is still a question mark. There's a local crane company that's willing to help out with the project. The purchase cost is going to be somewhere between about $10,000 and $17,000 for scrap, and the cost to get it loaded out and on the road will probably be about another $10,000. And then the cost to truck it, well, that depends exactly how far it's going. $50,000 will not pay for it all, but it will be enough to subsidize any one of the organizations that is looking at acquiring it for preservation or operation. Yeah, some people felt the need to share their insight in the form of graffiti in the course of the last week. Kind of a neat tender. It's an all steel frame, except for the front pilot beam, oddly enough. Still has a wood pilot beam on the tender, dual safety drawbar with a wood pilot beam. I've never seen something like that before. Honestly, the wood's completely gone, but dual safety drawbar. So, anywho, let's see, what does the locality all of a sudden want as opposed to the locomotive? Okay, because the state EPA, as it was asked by Andrew Wong, the Texas State EPA got onto the city about asbestos leaking out of the jacket, and basically just told them they had to deal with it. And the city doesn't have an extraordinary amount of money to work with, and sadly abating it and then scrapping it and removing the liability is just the most fiscally responsible move for the city, and I can't really fault them for that. Let's see, you're trying to scrap. What do you got? Matt Olmstead, anything you can contribute is a great thing. Mike Arseniag, I'm sorry, it's I have a really tough last name too. Sorry for butchering it. Yes, I've taken UT measurements. It needs a new backhead. The rest of the boiler is immaculate. Tom Murphy, anything helps. Go onto my Facebook page and you know, X out of the live stream, and the top post of my page is the GoFundMe site. Yeah, it is a lovely tender. Thank you, McCall. Kyle Flanagan. Go on to my page, just as I explained to Tom Murphy. Go on to my actual page, X out of the live feed, and the GoFundMe page is right at the top of my page. And Kyle, exactly right, and that's the point. It doesn't have to be one person donating a ton of money. A bunch of people pulling together in the preservation community to scrape together enough cash to get this locomotives, you know, basically to get a stay of execution and in fact a pardon. That's what's needed. Tom Panoche, yes, it needs saved. Yvonne, it is a 10-wheeler. It is a 10-wheeler. Kansas City Southern's 10-wheeler, a 460. 40,000 pounds of tractive effort. Wouldn't think it to look at this thing, but it has 40,000 pounds of tractive effort. To put it into comparison, that's only 8,000 pounds less than Atlanta and West Point 290, which is a substantially larger engine, of course, and more than most light Pacifics.
That's from the radio station.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
We should go talk on the phone.
All right, well, where's he at?
Just walk around backside.
All right, well, apparently we have a fellow here from a local radio station that stopped by. So that's interesting.
Hey, let me start grabbing tools.
Yes. What's his name? All right. Greetings.
Hey, yes, sir.
Hey, man, how are you?
Oh, fine.
My name's Jason Subchinsky.
Jason Statisky?
Yeah.
I was asking the guy that worked with you because the radio station was talking about it and wanted to know if, y'all want to go on the radio station and talk about it because we are...
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just calling him now. I hope he...
Okay. Well, tell you what, guys, I'm going to end this live stream
Oh, that's right.
and have a fellow who stopped by, knows some folks at a radio station, going to try to get us on the air and put this out to everybody. Feel free, please, Oil Fired, Russell Newman. Share this around, donate. Doesn't have to be big, just has to be great in numbers. This locomotive is days from getting cut up. We cannot let that happen.